Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive here on From the Corner Office. I'm Alan Ingram,
And I'm Chatty G.
and we are ready to, uh, dive into something you all flagged as pretty interesting.
Yeah, this one should be good.
It's Jim Camp's Start with No.
Oh, yeah. Definitely heard of this one.
And as always, we want to pull out the most valuable insights and practical strategies
For sure.
so that you can get a real grasp of effective negotiation without feeling like you're drowning in theory.
Right, we're going for those aha moments, those real takeaways.
Exactly, and I think we'll have some of those with this one.
Yeah, Jim Camp, he really shakes things up when it comes to how we think about negotiation. Like
Definitely.
right off the bat, he hits you with this pretty strong message. Be wary of win-win.
Oh, really? Win-win. That's like the holy grail of negotiation, isn't it?
Well, that's what most people think, but Camp says,
Yeah.
if this book does just one thing, and that one thing is making people aware of the dangers of win-win,
Okay.
then it's done its job.
So let's dive into this danger of win-win then.
Right. Because it's so deeply ingrained in business culture,
Yeah.
as the ideal outcome.
Oh, yeah.
So what's Camp's issue with it?
Basically, he says that a lot of seasoned negotiators see someone who's like overly focused on win-win as kind of an easy target.
Oh, wow.
He even mentions this high-level corporate strategy called PSOS.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we don't get all the details in the book, but
Right.
it was essentially designed to exploit negotiators who get stuck in that win-win mindset.
So PCOS is like a way to kind of tip the scales, create an imbalance.
Exactly. It's about using that imbalance to your advantage.
Can you give an example of how this might actually play out in a real situation?
Sure, he uses the example of GM's cost optimization strategy.
Okay.
Now, on the surface, that sounds pretty positive, right? GM keeps costs down. Suppliers become more efficient.
Yeah, everyone wins.
Right. But Camp argues that underneath all that win-win talk, it was really about GM pushing suppliers to the limit
Yeah.
to slash prices.
Even if it hurt the supplier.
Often, yeah, even to the point where it wasn't sustainable for them. And if a supplier couldn't make it work well, there was always another one waiting in the wings.
So the message was, we get what we want.
Exactly, regardless of what it means for the other side.
So the win-win was more like a PR move.
Pretty much. And it gets even crazier when you think about the fact that you might have business schools teaching win-win in one class.
Yeah.
And then in another course, like supply system management, they're teaching strategies that are all about outmaneuvering suppliers.
It's like teaching people to play nice and then teaching them how to cheat in the same school.
It really makes you wonder about how some of these theories actually play out in the real world.
It's a huge disconnect.
It is. And Camp brings up this point about the development of procurement software
Okay.
that's specifically designed to help companies dominate their suppliers.
Wow.
And the increasing power of these buying cooperatives that can really squeeze suppliers on price.
So the language of win-win can actually hide a pretty aggressive agenda.
Yeah, it's not that win-win is always bad, but it can be used as a smokescreen,
Yeah.
and we need to be aware of that.
It's like those companies that had a reputation for being ruthless negotiators.
Right.
They learned to use win-win language to soften their image.
Exactly. They became even more skilled at it after everyone knew they were tough to deal with.
Playing on that human need for connection and fairness.
Right. They might say something like, let's work together on this for a win-win outcome.
Well, they're really just trying to get a better deal for themselves.
Of course. And Camp contrasts this with the world of labor relations.
Yeah.
Where you have legally mandated good faith bargaining.
So rejecting win-win there could actually get you in trouble.
Exactly. And he points out that a lot of the traditional negotiation advice comes from that field.
So it makes sense why win-win became so popular.
Yeah, but Camp argues that applying it blindly in other situations can be a real mistake.
Especially if the other side isn't playing by the same rules.
Right. And he tells this great story about Euphoric Inc. and Worldwide Inc. to show how this can backfire.
What happened?
So Euphoric needed a 15-cent price increase on a product they were selling to Worldwide.
15 cents.
Yeah, it was a $2,000 product.
Wow. So practically nothing.
Exactly. But Worldwide was so afraid of rocking the boat, of like damaging the relationship by saying no.
Because of that win-win mentality.
Yeah, and Euphoric was basically digging their heels in, saying, no way, we're not budging.
So they were both stuck in this abstract idea of win-win.
Right. And it almost destroyed both companies over 15 cents.
That's incredible.
It really shows how clinging to win-win or trying to manipulate it can lead to a lose-lose situation.
So what's the alternative? What does Camp suggest instead?
Camp's system is about having a clear framework
Yeah.
Understanding what a good deal actually looks like for you
Okay.
and not feeling pressured to give away more than you should.
So it's about focusing on what you can control
Yes, your goals, your behavior,
instead of getting caught up in this idea of a perfect win-win.
which often isn't realistic anyway.
And this applies to more than just big corporate deals, right?
Oh, absolutely. Cam makes the point that negotiation is everywhere.
It's in our everyday lives.
Exactly. From deciding where to have dinner with your family to haggling with a cab driver.
Okay, so let's move on to another big idea from the book.
Sure.
And this one is you do not need this deal.
Ah, yes. One of Camp's most powerful principles.
It's a pretty bold statement.
It is.
Why does he see neediness as such a weakness?
Because when you're needy, you lose your objectivity and you make bad decisions.
It's like you're not thinking straight.
Exactly. And he uses this analogy of a predator sensing weakness.
Okay.
Like a lion in the wild.
Yeah.
They can smell fear. They can sense when an animal's vulnerable.
And they pounce.
Exactly. And it's the same in negotiation. The other side will pick up on your desperation and use it against you.
So it's about controlling your emotions.
Absolutely. And he says that for a lot of his clients, learning to manage their neediness,
Yeah.
that's been the most valuable thing they've taken away from his system.
It's fascinating how even historical examples back this up.
Right, like the Lewis and Clark expedition.
Those explorers were desperate for horses at one point, weren't they?
They were, and the Native Americans who were trading with them, they know it.
And they used that to their advantage.
Of course, it's human nature.
So Camp is saying we need to be able to separate our true needs for survival
Yeah.
from our wants, those desires for things that aren't essential.
Yeah, exactly like that fancy car or that dream house or closing a particular deal.
It's about keeping things in perspective.
Right. And he tells this great story about his flight instructor, Miller.
Oh, yeah. What was that about?
Camp was so focused on proving he was right in this hypothetical flying scenario
Okay.
that he missed the whole point of the lesson, which was about staying alive.
Wow. So even a need to be right can be dangerous.
Absolutely. It shows how subtle neediness can be and how it can cloud your judgment.
And it's not just about our internal feelings, right? It can show up in our language and behavior, too.
Yeah, like even something as simple as how you greet someone, saying, "Hello, Mr. Jones," instead of just, "Hello, Frank."
It sounds a bit formal.
It can be, and it can certainly signal that you're trying to please them. You're a little bit too eager.
Interesting.
Or the way you phrase an appointment request,
How so?
saying something like, "I was hoping I could maybe get 10 minutes of your time."
What's wrong with that?
It sounds needy. It puts you in a weaker position.
So what should you say instead?
Just be direct and confident. Something like, "I'd like to schedule 10 minutes with you."
So it's about projecting confidence even in small interactions.
Exactly. And Camp also warns against the dangers of those warm calls.
Where you're all excited about the potential deal before you've even had a real conversation.
Yeah, that premature enthusiasm can easily turn into neediness.
He gives some examples of how this can backfire, right?
He does like that executive who was so desperate for a promotion
Yeah,
that he ended up giving away too much in the negotiation.
making the other side suspicious.
Exactly. They were like, "Wait a minute, why is this person so eager to make this deal?" And there's that story about Camp's client who was so keen to close a big deal
Okay.
that they offered such a generous offer, it actually backfired.
Really?
Yeah, the other CEO was a savvy negotiator, and he saw right through it.
He sensed that neediness.
Exactly, and it made him question their competence. He thought, if they're willing to give away this much, there must be something wrong.
So it had the opposite effect.
It did. Instead of sealing the deal,
Mm-hmm.
it actually made the other side more cautious.
And this all ties in with his no closing rule, doesn't it?
It does. Rushing to close a deal is often a sign of neediness.
And people can sense that.
They can think about it. Everyone hates those pushy salespeople.
Oh, yeah, those hard sell tactics.
Exactly, those trick closes that make you feel like you're being manipulated.
So it just makes you want to run the other way.
Right, and Kent makes this really important distinction between need,
Okay.
which he says is like death in a negotiation,
Wow.
and want, which is a natural human desire.
So it's okay to want something.
It is, but it's about being in control of that desire.
So how do you project that kind of confidence?
It's about being calm, being disciplined, and showing that you're not desperate.
Okay, so we've talked about the pitfalls of win-win and the importance of overcoming neediness.
Yeah. Two key ideas start with no.
What's next?
Well, the next concept is something he calls the Columbo effect.
the Columbo effect.
Yeah, the secret being not okay.
Now, for those who might not know who Columbo is.
Right, he was this TV detective,
Yeah.
kind of rumpled, always seemed a little bit clueless.
But he always got his man.
Exactly, he was brilliant.
So how does this relate to negotiation?
Cam says that just like Columbo, the skilled negotiator understands that in any interaction,
Yeah.
only one person can truly feel okay,
Okay.
like truly comfortable, confident in control.
And that should be the other person.
Ideally, yes, by letting them feel a little bit superior, a little bit more in charge.
You actually gain the upper hand.
You do. It's counterintuitive, but it works.
It's like Columbo's adversaries, they underestimated him.
Exactly. They thought they were smarter than him.
Yeah. And that made them let their guard down.
Right. They felt comfortable enough to reveal information they wouldn't have otherwise.
So it's a psychological tactic.
It is, and it's based on this idea that when someone sees you as less competent,
Yeah.
they tend to relax, they don't feel as threatened.
And they might say things they wouldn't say to someone they saw as an equal.
Exactly.
But this goes against everything we're taught about business, doesn't it?
It does. We're always told to project strength and competence.
Not weakness.
Right. But Camp says that in negotiation, strategically projecting that sense of being not okay
Okay.
can be a powerful way to disarm your opponent.
He gives the example of Network Inc., right?
He does. They were on the verge of bankruptcy,
Okay.
and they were really hesitant to reopen negotiations with a supplier.
Why?
They thought it would make them look unprofessional.
Like they were admitting they'd made a mistake.
Exactly. But Camp convinced them that the potential damage to their reputation
Yeah.
was far less significant than the very real risk of going bankrupt.
So sometimes being not okay means being honest about your situation.
It does, and it can actually work in your favor.
So how does this apply when you're dealing with a really tough negotiator?
Camp tells his clients to not react defensively in those situations.
Okay.
Instead, they should listen calmly, take notes.
And maybe ask some questions that make them seem a little less knowledgeable.
Right, to subtly reinforce that not okay feeling.
And then what?
Then they simply ask, what would you like us to do?
Putting the ball back in the other person's court?
Exactly. It takes the pressure off you and forces them to come up with a solution.
It's a clever tactic.
It is, but it can be tough to pull off.
Especially when we're so conditioned to project an image of success.
Yeah, like those CEOs we see in the magazines.
Always looking confident and in control.
Right. But Camp makes a compelling case for the power of strategically embracing that not okay stance.
Okay, let's move on to another key idea from the book.
All right.
And this one is forget. Yes, forget maybe.
Yes, this is a classic Camp principle.
It sounds pretty dismissive, though.
It does. But he's making a point.
What's the point?
He argues that the best yes, the most valuable yes,
Yeah.
comes after a considered no.
So you start by saying no.
Exactly. He believes that's where negotiation really begins.
Not by being agreeable.
No, by establishing your boundaries.
He even titled the book Start with No.
He did, to really hammer home that point.
He uses this example of cold calling
Yeah.
and actually inviting the other person to say no.
Right. It sounds counterintuitive.
It does, because you're trying to get a meeting.
You are, but by saying something like, if this isn't a good fit, just tell me and I'll get off the phone. Is that fair?
Okay.
You're actually taking the pressure off them.
By giving them permission to say no.
Exactly. You're respecting their time and their decision.
Interesting.
And it can actually make them more receptive to hearing what you have to say.
But saying no feels so negative,
It does. It goes against that whole win-win culture.
where everyone's supposed to be agreeable.
Right. Camp says that this is one of the hardest principles for people to accept
Why is that?
because it feels confrontational. It feels like you're closing doors.
And we don't want to offend anyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he argues that saying maybe or yes just to avoid that difficult
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
can lead to bigger problems down the road.
Like ending up in a situation you don't want to be in.
Exactly. Or creating resentment because you didn't set clear boundaries from the start.
He tells that story about the new client who immediately offered a discount.
Oh, yeah. Without even thinking about it.
Just to please the other side.
Right. And it totally
Well,
backfired.
They're too eager.
They were, and it made them look weak.
And there's that story about the negotiation with the Japanese corporation.
Oh, yes, where one of the team members blurted out a 2% discount.
2%.
Yeah, in a $1 billion deal.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
It is. And he did it just to fill the silence.
Because he was uncomfortable.
Exactly. He wanted to make the other side feel okay.
But it created chaos for his own team.
They had to scramble to recover from that.
So it's about being comfortable with silence.
It is, and not feeling pressure to say yes just to please the other person.
And not letting your emotions drive your decisions.
Right. In the long run, strong business
Yeah.
relationships. They're built on mutual respect and clear communication.
Not on trying to be everyone's best friend.
Exactly.
So this fear of saying no, it often comes from a worry about damaging relationships.
Yeah.
But Camp also talks about another reason,
Which is?
the fear of making the wrong decision.
Yes, that can be paralyzing.
We get stuck in that loop of what if I make the wrong choice?
Right. What if I could get a better deal? What if I miss out?
And that can lead to indecision
It can, and that's why people say maybe.
as a way to delay the decision.
Exactly. But Camp says that negotiation is really just a series of decisions.
Okay.
And if you make a bad decision, you learn from it, and you make a better one next time.
He uses that analogy of his flight instructor again.
Right? Who told him, as long as you're making decisions, we can fix the bad ones.
It's about taking action.
It is not getting stuck in analysis paralysis.
And he gives examples of big companies making course corrections.
Yeah, like IBM initially dismissing the PC,
Okay.
and Microsoft initially dismissing the internet.
Big mistakes.
They were, but they adapted. They changed course.
So it's not a sign of weakness to admit you were wrong.
No, it's a sign of strength.
And it's important not only to be able to say no yourself,
Yeah,
but to be able to accept no from the other side.
absolutely. And to make it clear from the start that no is a perfectly acceptable response.
It sets the tone for a more honest negotiation.
It does. And it can actually build trust.
So this leads us to the final key aspect we'll cover today.
Okay.
And it's the idea of mission and purpose.
Ah, yes, M&P.
Camp sees this as a guiding principle.
He does, for making decisions in negotiation and in life.
So it's like your North Star.
Exactly. It gives you a framework for making choices.
He uses the example of President Lincoln, whose mission was to preserve the Union.
A powerful example of a clear and unwavering purpose.
It gave him direction in the face of incredible challenges.
Exactly. And Camp shares a story about a client
Okay.
who developed this M&P that was centered around imagination, possibility, and healing.
Interesting.
And it helped them clarify which parts of their business they should keep.
And which parts they should let go of.
Exactly. It gave them a filter for making tough decisions.
He also tells that story about the father with the premature baby.
Oh, yes, a very moving example.
The baby needed heart surgery,
Right?
and the father used a very specific M&P to guide his conversations with the doctors.
Yeah, he was focused on minimizing the risk to his child. He knew what was most important.
And it helped him advocate for the best possible care.
It did.
And then there are those negative examples like Eastern Airlines.
Right, where the real M&P seemed to be about stripping assets.
Not about building a sustainable business.
And the Quaker Oats acquisition of Snapple.
Yeah, that was a disaster, wasn't it?
It was, and Camp suggests that it was partly because Quaker Oats didn't really understand Snapple
They didn't understand its core identity,
or its distribution network.
so they lacked a clear vision for how to make it work.
They did.
And Camp's point is that while you can't always control the outcome of a negotiation,
Yeah,
you can control your preparation.
absolutely. And that preparation starts with a strong mission and purpose.
So to recap our deep dive into start with no,
Right?
we've looked at Camp's warnings about the win-win trap,
Right?
the crucial importance of overcoming neediness,
It's a big one.
the surprising power of being not okay,
Definitely a counterintuitive but effective strategy.
the importance of embracing no,
Setting those boundaries.
and the foundational role of mission and purpose in guiding our decisions.
It's a powerful framework for negotiation and for life.
Camp's whole approach is about shifting our focus
From what?
from trying to manipulate the other side
Okay.
to understanding the dynamics of negotiation and making deliberate choices based on our own goals and limitations.
It's about being strategic and intentional.
Exactly. And maybe the most valuable takeaway for you, our listener,
Yeah.
is to think about your own level of neediness.
In your next interaction,
Whether it's a formal negotiation or just a conversation.
how aware are you of that neediness?
And how is it affecting your behavior?
It's something to really pay attention to.
It could change the way you approach these situations.
It could.
And if this deep dive into Start With No has piqued your interest,
Yeah.
we highly recommend checking out the book.
It's full of great insights.
And it offers a really different perspective on negotiation.
One that can be incredibly valuable in all areas of your life.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into effective negotiation.
From the corner office.
Until next time, keep exploring.
And keep learning.
We'll see you then.